Good evening, everyone. Jeff with Astroscoop, back again with another Astroscoop Astrology Livestream. So happy Friday the 14th, it's 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this is a big day for most teachers and children because, at least here, everyone's out as of today or yesterday. All the school staff and kids are out for the summer. So that creates a whole new vibration for the whole country, but particularly for children, right, of school age. It's a big, big time. Remember that? Remember that feeling when you're about to, if you were graduating a certain grade and getting out, finishing a certain grade, remember that feeling when the summer's coming? Especially kids like under 12, the summer's just bursting with energy and possibilities. And I think as adults, we forget how precious it is each and every day. And it's a gift. And what's beautiful about this period we're going to talk about tonight is, I think the best thing about it is we're dealing with the longest amount of light in the next week, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. So we have the longest days here tonight. I think the sun is setting close to 8:30 p.m., even though it's quite gloomy. The East Coast is having a lot of thunder showers and storms, but the longest, shortest night, the longest day. So that is pivotal in the astrological cycle of the zodiac because we will be starting summer, the solstice, in 6 days. So think about that. That's amazing. So every season commences with a cardinal sign, and that will be Cancer. So tonight is the 14th, June 14th, 2024. We talked about Gemini 3 last week, the third decan, late Gemini people. And tonight we'll kind of finish that up. And then we'll talk about the Gemini-Cancer Cusp coming up very soon. But yeah, this is a wonderful, wonderful time for energy and for the weather, depending on where you are in on the East Coast. If you're not too far deep south, the last week or two and then the next week or two is like almost perfect weather because it's getting warm, it's vibrant, there's no chilliness, and it's not too hot and not too humid. I guess unless you're maybe in like Maryland, DC, or deeper south, then there's probably humidity already, I'll bet. But here it's just like the next week, 10 days is going to be perfect. And then it's going to get, it is going to get really hot. I think we're having a heat wave next week. So we have to enjoy the weather before it gets too vibrant. And for those of you that enjoy that really, really strong heat that we get when we go into Leo in the summer, you will appreciate that. You'll get that gift a little early from Mother Nature coming up very soon, at least in this area. So June 14th, 2024, the last week of Gemini. And then, like I said, in 6 days or so, we're going to start the solstice, which will be for all Cancer people, the crab, the Moonchild. You will have birthdays and your your solar return coming up very, very soon, starting the summer. So that's a pretty amazing time. And I wanted to mention 85% of my viewers are not subscribed. So now it's gone from 90 to 85. So that's good. More people are subscribing. But still, 8 out of 10 people are not subscribed. So if you see this live stream and you get any kind of value out of it and you enjoy it, please subscribe so you won't miss any videos or these weekly live streams that I do on Fridays or Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on YouTube. So please tell your family and friends to subscribe. It's free. It's easy. You can do personalized if you don't want to get every notification of mine. I don't post that many videos in a month, but if you didn't want to get every one, you could just click personalized, but still be a subscriber. And based on the videos you view of mine, even if you view really old ones, it will suggest ones that are similar, which I like to do that with a lot of people that I'm subscribed to. I click the personalized instead of all, because I mentioned last week, some people do 2 or 3 or 4 videos a week. So I don't necessarily have the time to keep up with that. So if I did 3 videos a week, I wouldn't expect the majority of viewers to be able to keep up with that either. So you can click that, subscribe, and I really, really appreciate it. And the United States continues, for the second week in a row, continues to be my most viewed country, where the previous crown last month went to Russia. So that's interesting. I really appreciate, now we're getting more of the, that's how it was in the very beginning when I had like 10 subscribers. It was almost all 90% were United States views because there weren't many people. So now we're getting, getting people from different countries and more men and women of varying ages from the United States. So I really appreciate that. And if you are from the U.S., let me know. Are you East Coast? Are you West Coast? Are you Midwest? Are you New England? Like, just let me know where you are. And I'd be very curious to know where the majority of people are watching. And that's helpful in terms of creating content and video for the future and just knowing that sort of thing. So last week we talked about Gemini 3, which was June 10th to right around the 18th. So we are in that period still. We are in late Gemini. And for Gemini people that had a birthday in the past week since the last live stream, you are a Mercury Gemini co-ruled by Uranus. So it's just a Mercury individual, a witty, imaginative, and strongly mental person with flavors of Uranus or Aquarius flavor in your zodiac chart. So if you're in a late Gemini, you'd want to look to Mercury and Uranus in your birth chart. You can look that up yourself, or better yet, have someone like me or a qualified astrologer decode it for you and figure out the meanings for your birth chart, and then compare that to the transiting planets, which is kind of the bread and butter, which most astrologers do. Astrologers love the transits and how they affect your natal birth chart or a natal country or city chart or an event. So those things are really good for Mercury and Uranus. So late Gemini energy, if you look at outside, you look at how I was talking about, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, how it started to really feel really, really green around here, especially in my backyard. But now it's just absolutely vibrant and full bloom. And it's not even technically summer yet, technically by sign. So we have another 5.5, 6 days. So it's just amazing when you think of that energy. You think of the vibrancy of the latest Gemini. This is like Gemini going out with this kind of vibrancy. And it's coming up on the active sign of Cancer. So the cardinal signs, Cancer is one of 4, denotes strong push and action. Now, obviously, there's many zodiac signs that are active, but the cardinal signs in particular, including Cancer, push in a very direct way to get their needs met and meet and try to strive for their goals. And Cancer is no exception. But we're going to talk tonight about not just Cancer, but we're going to talk about the Gemini-Cancer Cusp and what that means with the 2 signs coming together before we enter the true Cancer period, which is at the end of June, right around the 26th. And then going into that first week of July, that is going to be the true Cancer 1 person. Cancer 1 person who is doubly ruled by the moon ruler, moon subruler, So that's going to be an interesting period. So let's talk about late Gemini just briefly. As I mentioned last week, late Gemini is an exploratory Gemini sign, probably more so than the first or second decanates. So beyond curious, very curious, and likes to look around and see what's around the corner. And I mentioned that last week about if you're traveling or doing an activity with someone born this week or strongly Gemini in their chart, especially late Gemini, there'll be this seeking mentality. Oh, greetings. Carolyn says good evening, and Karen Karst says greetings. Hello, Karen. Nice to see you. And so the Gemini energy, this late Gemini energy, even if you have it in a planet like the moon or rising, you are a seeker. It's a probing, seeking. I was just talking to someone earlier about that. There might be no other sign that's more, ferociously curious than Gemini in just pure curiosity. I think for penetrating and probing subjects, that would be Scorpio. I think Scorpio would win the crown with that. But for just pure curiosity and inquisition, and wow, I'm so interested in this book. I'm so interested in this person. I'm so interested in this subject. That's definitely Gemini, and definitely this past week, which continues to be tonight and this weekend. And so 15, so 18th. So it looks like around Wednesday or so, we will start this Gemini-Cancer Cusp period, which is June 19th to the 24th or 25th. And that varies depending on what you read online and which books you read. But the summer solstice energy is very specific. I think it's very specific in how it relates to the sign of Cancer and the female energy of the moon, and coming off of the masculine sign of Gemini, which we're still in for a few more days. So if late Gemini people are curious, very inquisitive, with a touch of risk-taking, exploratory, and would be attracted to possibly more serious or darker subjects than their own personality, because they would need that balance. They might be attracted to more quieter or reserved or mysterious people because they might not see themselves like that. Now, all this, take this with a grain of salt, because we're talking about the period here, and we're talking about the sun signs and also planets that are in these signs. But you really have to look at any specific chart for any person or event or country. You really have to look at every single planet and see how they come together, because, are there Geminis out there that are very serious and not flighty and not restless? Yes. And then it almost always shows in the chart that there's, major indicators in the chart, good planets, good planetary alignments, and then other stronger signs. And by stronger, I mean maybe more stable or more focused for longer periods, or more stamina to kind of balance out that restless mercurial air. So it always shows in the chart somewhere. And I think I've talked to other astrologers that wonder sometimes if it's a placebo effect, that if you, especially very early on as an astrologer, when you get into looking up charts and then you start to get your own system like I have. So like I do the way I decode a chart is probably very similar to thousands of other astrologers, some of which are much more advanced than I am. So, but yet I take that, kind of baseline or simple approach, and then it's my own, it's my own system, or the medium or the person that takes the clay of whatever they're doing and puts that special love or that special thoughtfulness or that special spark or charisma or whatever it is we have into the chart. And you just have to find people that resonate with that. And I know I've mentioned before in live streams that I've had many psychic and astrology readings from different people, men and women, different generations, different skill levels. And sometimes I was impressed, other times I wasn't. But the times I weren't impressed, that doesn't necessarily mean the reader wasn't, the reader didn't have sufficient skills or insight. It just might mean I wasn't ready to hear that because I was younger, maybe more immature, and maybe the chemistry wasn't there, kind of thing. So it's like if I try to coach someone in any capacity for astrology, there has to be a working chemistry between myself and the other person from the start. There has to be at least something there that feels natural and feels like you can move with it. If you feel that block with someone, or someone is really, really blocked and unwilling, then it's going to take probably a very specific kind of, astrologer or coach or person to get through to them. So that's a really, really important thing on top of just looking at a period and sun signs, because the chart is extremely important. So I digress. So the Gemini-Cancer cusp is coming into summer. So technically right now on the East Coast, it's still spring, even though my kids think it's summer. They're like, it's so hot and it's muggy. I said earlier today, it felt swampy. Yeah, that's how it felt. I was out earlier this evening. It felt swampy. I mean, for June 14th, it almost felt like July 14th. So yeah, it does feel like summer, but it's not summer. We're in Gemini. That zodiac wheel we haven't hit the Moonchild yet. So late Gemini into Cancer cusp. So Gemini-Cancer cusp comes at a time of, I put on here, late Gemini into Cancer, air meets water for an imaginative and enchanting cusp period. And that's really what it is. It's very enchanting. This period, this time of year is so enchanting, right? To adults and kids alike. And for Geminis especially, Gemini people tend to have such a youthful attitude, regardless of chronological age. And Geminis have that resilience too, to bounce back from illness and hurt relationships or failed friendships or burnt out jobs. Gemini, that's a general statement for all Gemini. But yeah, Gemini people coming up to Cancer, there's a very strong resilience there. And then coming into Cancer, there is more strength to hold on to something for a longer period, or someone for a longer period, so to speak. So it's a very enchanting time, imaginative time. You have air meeting water. So you have the mercurial aspects of Gemini, but instead of it being just Gemini with a hint of another air sign ruler like Uranus or Mercury, you have the mercurial late Gemini with a touch of the moon, which is so different. And this also goes hand in hand for Gemini people. If you have a water sign, if you have a major water placement in your chart, like especially the moon in water, Venus in water, or even water rising, that will change the landscape a lot of your personality as a whole, in terms of being maybe a possibly detached or cool Gemini that can warm you up or create more passion. And so it will give you a higher score, so to speak, maybe in, sympathy towards others and that sort of thing, or connection. So there's always something in the chart that's going to either increase that Gemini energy for you, or maybe block it, or even subdue it a little bit. Or if there's earth signs, that they might slow it down, which you may not like within yourself, like too fast, too slow. We all have those placements in our chart that you have to be okay with it. But there's certain placements in your chart that if you're really, really aware of it, you can feel like it's pacing. I know I talked about that in Taurus, because Taurus is very much a pace sign. Finding pace in life is difficult, I think, for all of us. That pace of not too fast, not too slow, not too boring, stimulated, but not overstimulated, right? And of course, people that are neurodivergent, people on the autism spectrum, or people that have high levels of ADHD or mental health disorders, their threshold level is much lower in terms of that overload and being overstimulated, kind of thing. So the Gemini nature on top of that could be very, very, very tough. So Gemini Cancer, that's coming into the water sign. So Gemini Cancer people, so if you're born on the very last day this year, so if a baby is born in the coming days, he or she's a Gemini. But if she's born on the 18th or 19th, she's the very, very last. She's going to be a 28. He or she's going to be 28 or 29 degree Gemini, which is basically a hair away from Cancer. It's like right there. So that person, that baby, when he or she grows up, could feel very much even more like a Cancer than a late Gemini. So there really is that beautiful blend. And for when I meet cusp, I know so many cusp people in my family and friends. There's so many cuspers. I wonder why that is. I wonder if statistically there are more births in certain years on cusp periods. If you do the math from the 9 months, I don't know. But I know so many cusp people, so many like 23 people, 24s, 22s, 20. Those are very popular those days. 20, 22, 23, 24 people of all years and then different months. And they're often on that right in the middle of that cusp period when the new sign is starting, the new sign each month. So it's quite interesting. But this Gemini Cancer cusp energy is full bloom, as you can tell when you look outside. And it's peak light, like I mentioned before, in the Northern Hemisphere. It's really, really peak light. And the beauty of this cusp is the Gemini person, the Gemini part of the person can be very cool in the matters of the heart and love. It doesn't mean that they don't care or love, but they can kind of almost like a valve, turn it on or turn it off. And the Cancer part, coming up to the Cancer part, the early part is just pure moon energy. It's like raw moon energy, which Cancer ones, which we'll get to, early Cancer people are much more, controlled by their emotions because their emotions are very strong. So a late Gemini that may be more of a cool cucumber, so to speak, coming into Gemini, that is an interesting combination for the person to feel like, well, I'm cool 1 minute, and then the next minute I feel all this warm and fuzzy Cancer stuff. Cancer is I feel. And the people I've known on this week are like that. And one woman I know, her daughter said, my mom is really, really sweet and loving, but you wouldn't know it because when you meet her, she's very unsentimental about things. She's very matter of fact and unsentimental. So she's a Cancer on this cusp, but she has the moon in Virgo, and then she also has another planet in Gemini. So there's a lot of Mercury there coloring her moon. So it's that combination. So that's why it's very important for like Gemini, which can be kind of a chameleon. It's important to look at the other placements around the birth chart to see how that fits in with your Gemini. Do things make you more grounded, more emotional, less emotional kind of thing? So full bloom, and it's feeling, which is Cancer, meets logic, obviously, which is Mercury and Gemini. Now, I mentioned last week that the late Gemini energy is kind of, it's night and day and light and dark kind of thing. And Gemini is really very dual. And it's like if the Gemini planet or person has the wonder of a child, that's a good way to look at it. The wonder, the enchantment of a child, like when you're first in love with someone, or there's a new friendship, you have a new pal, you have a new coworker, a new business partner, or something that's just so exciting and so stimulating because it's all fresh. I can't wait to know what this is going to give me. And it's a little challenging, and it's like, woo, that starts the fireworks for the Gemini mind. And it's feeling and it's logic. So coming up on the Cancer, that slows it down and kind of says to Gemini, all right, well, it's great to be stimulated, but maybe we should also put a little more caring into what we're going to do, a little more caring into our decisions, sort of thing. So that's where the Cancer voice on this cusp comes into play with the Gemini. And there's a place for things to be light in certain relationships. There's a place where Cancer can be too heavy, and we'll talk more about that when we get to Cancer, how the Cancer energy can be smothering. Some people see the Cancer as smothering. You hear that thunder? Ooh, that's amazing. Very, very guttural. So there's a place for those light relationships, which a sign like Gemini is good at. Everyone needs that. The mundane day-to-day living can be very rough, especially rough on empaths and sensitive people and intuitives. So anything to lighten things up a little bit while still taking things seriously and being sufficiently serious for your responsibilities, but lighten up, that's a good thing. And then coming into this enchanting period, Cancer, contrary to what a lot of people think about Cancer, Cancers are a lot of fun, and Cancers have an amazing sense of humor. Could be a lot of fun and an amazing sense of humor, even though early Cancer people are highly sensitive and maybe a little prone to depressive moods because of the moon there. And that's important to look in the chart as well. So this cusp, air and water, as I mentioned before, you have Mercury, the Mercury-Uranus decadent, which is this week, coming into the moon, which is on the 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and maybe 25th. Still the cusp, but those would be the Cancer days. So, I mentioned this Cancer woman that I know who's on the 24th. So she really identifies strongly as a Cancer. But when I explained to her the Gemini-Cancer cusp and what that means, and she read a little bit about it, she said, oh, yeah. She said, you know what? Since you put it that way, I can see my Gemini side. I can see it. She said, I do get kind of bored easily. She used to be in community meetings, and she said, yeah, I get kind of bored easily. Like, I'm ready to move on. I'm like, well, that sounds more like the Gemini part. So, and then she also has another planet in Gemini. So she's got the half of Gemini and then the Venus. So that's why it's good to see. And that's another thing. Even if you're a Cancer on this cusp, if you have a Gemini planet and you're a sun in Cancer, not a sun in Gemini, but you have a Cancer planet, like you have a Gemini planet and you're a Cancer, that will lighten it up. So if you were a Cancer, but you had the moon in Gemini, your sun in Cancer would be ruled by the moon in Gemini. So that would be prominent. That would make a normally possibly heavy emotional Cancer a lot lighter, depending on the aspects and the house. But that would change the landscape of the Cancer person a lot if there was a major Gemini planet there. So Gemini is this period coming into the cusp, very thoughtful. And, I may have been a little rough on Geminis the last couple of weeks as far as like being detached and flighty and restless. But Gemini people are, again, if you look at the literature and the songwriting and the prodigious talent of Gemini people in history, the words and the singing and the messages, Bob Dylan and Paul McCartney and, there's so many people. Gemini is very, very thoughtful. Their thoughts just change quickly, which can make them seem uncaring because they're moving at that pace, or it can make them seem glib or uncaring, but it doesn't necessarily mean they are. Very thoughtful, especially coming up with the Cancer, and detached. The main mode is kind of detached. And with the Cancer energy here on this cusp, there's a possibility for Gemini Cancer people to isolate themselves a bit and be in their ivory tower. Gemini cusp periods are very sensitive to the season. So when you think about where you're living, now I know this is different for people that maybe don't have the 4 seasons in what state they live in, Or obviously, if you live in the southern hemisphere, that's a whole nother discussion. If for someone there, it's going to be winter, right? It's the 6-month switch. So they might say, well, I don't get that. That guy doesn't make any sense because I'm almost winter. So where's the full bloom greenery of winter? But so that it definitely, it's every cusp period is very specific to the weather and the season. And I think cusp people in general are to me are just more sensitive to the traits of both signs. So people will often say, I'm on this cusp, but I feel more like this person or this sign than the other sign. And they're very sensitive to that for the most part. So cusp people have to be careful of being isolated. That's also like their Pisces Aquarius cusp as well. That's a air and water cusp. This is an air and water cusp. So without the, if you had other signs in your chart that spur you into direct action or to make more of an impact on your environment. Now, Cancer, which we'll talk about when we get to the pure Cancer period, Cancers are sidestep like a crab. They sidestep their goals. But Cancers can be very ambitious and very driving about getting what they want done, similar to their opposite sign, Capricorn. It's just a little more passive in a way. So you can, people on this cusp you could underestimate them as being kind of fanciful and not ambitious, but there is that Cancer part that is more driving in a very quiet way. So it's important for people on this cusp to not be isolated and to take a little of that late Gemini risk in life. Cancer is more cautious. So that's what it's meaning up on. It's like the late Gemini risk coming into a very cautious sign. So that can cancel each other out. So the Gemini risk coming into a tenacious period, a tenacious sign, which is Cancer, and creates a very private, sort of private individual, even though the summer period is more extroverted, where for the most of the time in the next few weeks, we're all going to be out more, possibly more outside of the house, more social, seeing people, whether it be at beaches or pools or parties, sort of thing. We're just going to be seen more just because of the weather. So that is kind of interesting because Gemini Cancer people are social, but also extremely private. So it's kind of like you have to earn getting into their private world. And that's part of the late Gemini, but it's more so of, the Cancer, definitely. So if you're a person on this period that has an additional Cancer planet in your chart, that would make that even more so, more prominent. And again, you could look at the moon there. That would give you more indication. So this is an affectionate cusp, absolutely. The Gemini part is very charming, and Cancer part can be defensive, but Cancers usually need and want a lot of love. It's very important to people on this cusp. And it's kind of similar to last week. It's a little more farther of a young adult attitude. So probably maybe someone in their 20s and a young adult coming into the world seeking, but now maybe seeking a little more feeling and a little more caring than just the adventure of Gemini. And that combination could be kind of drifting because the Gemini mentality, the restlessness, and then the Cancers can be kind of fanciful, and also the combination of air and water is into kind of fantasy and imagination. Very good for like novelists, very good for fiction. I would think a fiction would be great for a cusp person born on this cusp. Would be great in like writing fiction, sort of thing, and the imagination is very strong there. So reasoning powers, which is the Gemini, very, very good, comes into deep feelings. And that's because it's coming into the early well of Cancer, the early water of Cancer. And Cancer, the late Gemini Cancer into early Cancer energy is, you don't always see it. So even if a person on this cusp is kind of cool and detached, underneath, their feelings could be very deep, and they're just waiting for the right moment. There could be a little shyness because of the Gemini reluctance, maybe to express more than just mental ideas, and then the Cancer cautiousness. So there could be a lot going on there, sort of underneath, and that's really true for all cusp periods. Cusp periods are just so amazing. So I think for any of you that are born on a cusp, it's a truly a unique thing in the zodiac wheel. Wow, you hear that? It's really stormy now. Very amazing. So, cool cucumber, as I mentioned before, I think is the phrase versus I feel. I think is Gemini, I feel is Cancer. So there can be a seesaw there between thoughts and feelings, and not always easy to reconcile there. So this can produce the Gemini social energy wants a certain amount of attention, and then the Cancer coming up into early Cancer energy wants like emotional attention. So that can create a sort of demanding kind of personality at times for attention, but also a love of repose. So it's like as soon as a person on this cusp goes out to get the attention, just as quickly they may want to retreat and have the repose and have their private world again. And a lot of that, wow, woo, that's intense. Now look at the chart. With the repose, their own privacy and their own thoughts. Again, very, very thoughtful. Now, when you consider the opposite of this cusp, in 6 months, we'll be talking about that it's almost winter. And the opposite is the Sagittarius Capricorn cusp, which is fire and earth. So when you think about fire is more direct, the earth is making more of a physical impact on its environment in terms of structure and maybe goals and ambition. So that's the opposite here of the Gemini Cancer. So you have air, water, opposite the fire and earth. And then that cusp is also similar in terms of privacy as well as this cusp. But the difference here is there's more of more of a power dynamic, most likely, with the Sag and Capricorn cusp as opposed to this one. So the Gemini Cancer cusp is more into like enchantment and love. It has much to do with the summer and this time of year. And then, of course, the darker, colder winter, where now you have the longer nights and the very short days, is a whole different feeling with those, kind of a more serious feeling. So that's a good balance to think about. So Gemini Cancer people, your fire and earth sign friends or family can balance you out in that way. And so you have to be careful not to be too demanding, and it's important for cusp signs. It's maybe harder for cusp signs to be direct with their energy because they're not just under the influence of one sign, they're under the influence of two. So when we get to July, someone that's born July 1st, that person is a Cancer. They're not a Gemini Cancer, they're a Cancer. So unless they have Gemini in their chart, they're most likely not going to be colored heavily by the previous air sign energy, and much more for the water. So cusp people, it's good to have people around you that are your opposite to give that balance. And of course, opposites attract, and they can also repel. And in astrology, with the the aspects between planets and signs, like Gemini and Sagittarius are opposite. And there's a lot to talk about that in terms of compatibility. And Gemini and like Virgo, which we'll be talking about coming up. Gemini and Virgo are both ruled by Mercury, but Virgo is square Gemini. So that can create tension, but there's also similarities. And then Gemini is square Pisces as well, which is very, very different than Gemini, but it can also create a spark. The square can create a spark of interest and curiosity between a Gemini and a Pisces person because of their mental or emotional sensitivity. So that can be like, wow, this person's nothing like me, but that's also very interesting. So the opposite, it's really a fine-tuning thing with how astrologers look at the signs and compatibility, because it's not always as easy as the general definitions or with traditional astrology, with the square, the trine and all that. And maybe we'll do a live stream just on the aspects. If you want that, you could let me know. Comments. All right, so right now we're at 7:40. I think there's a couple people in. Boy, can you hear that? I don't know if my microphone could pick that up. I'm using a different mic tonight, and I have a door right here, a window, and it's very, very intense. Yeah, lovely though, lovely. I love it. All right, so let's talk about celebrities. And, for future live streams, if I tend to bore you in the beginning, you could just scrub. You could wait for the replay. And if you want to just hear the celebrities, just go into, 40 minutes or 45 minutes. Just scrub with your mouse or your finger on your phone or tablet or the computer, and you can just go right in and scrub right to the 35, 40, or 45-minute mark. I do that with podcasts and live streams as well. Not because I don't want to listen to the whole person, but sometimes they're 2 or 3 hours, and it's like, oh my gosh. I talk for an hour. I don't know how people do 2 or 3 hours. That's amazing that people can do that and still not get bored of themselves. So celebrities, awesome week. I know I say that every time, but really, really amazing. So Meryl Streep, I think most people agree, probably one of the best actresses of the last 40, 50 years. And if you look at Meryl's face, when I was looking up celebrities, I found, for some reason, just personally, I found the women on this cusp tends to have more classic good looks than the men. Not sure why that is. It doesn't mean the men are unattractive. It just means in general, I see more of the kind of Gemini or Cancer beauty in the women on this cusp. So Meryl Streep's no exception. She's interesting, and she's very clever. She has that smile and that spark in her eye, but she can also be very emotional, and you start to see kind of that Cancer part of her, depending on. It's almost like the Gemini can act like a Cancer, but she's got that because she's not a true Gemini. She's on the cusp, so she's great. And Lionel Richie, he was with the Commodores in the 70s. Talk about a Gemini Cancer that has staying power. He had a long-standing period with the Commodores, and then he had that huge solo career where he was right up there with the most selling records with Paul McCartney, Michael Jackson, and Prince. So, he has so many like number 1 and top 10 hits. And, I don't like all of Lionel Richie's music, but his early stuff is really, really good. Very thoughtful, wonderful ballads, and poignant. I know I've mentioned the word poignant many times in the Gemini period, and his stuff is, he's an undeniable talent. John Goodman, who's a very quirky actor, I think underrated. I think John is great in some movies and others not so much. So I think it depends on the material. I think John is a chameleon. He was to work with, but he can also be very emotional, and he could show some good heart, I think, in his roles. Michael Anthony is the bassist for the rock group Van Halen, and he was the co-founder of the original Van Halen with David Lee Roth. Amazing, really cool hair, and plays bass incredibly fast. So I definitely see the Mercury Gemini part there. I don't know much about his personal life, and I would like to know where the Cancer Cusp part comes in. John Taylor, another bassist, bass guitar player from Duran Duran from the 70s and 80s and today, and he's still playing with Duran Duran, and they're still touring. So that's another thing with people on this cusp. You're starting to see a element of tenacity. So not that Geminis can't go the long haul with things they're interested in, but most likely Geminis are going to make more turns along their path in life. And it could just be that Geminis love this path, but this path they also equally love. You know, it's like if you're in love with two people at the same time in life, that happens. You could actually be equally in love with two people, and you don't know why there isn't one of the, it doesn't tip the scale. One isn't more. So it's not like they don't care or they care less about another. It's just like maybe it's equal. So that's kind of like these musicians. They obviously were interested enough and not bored enough with the material to stick with it. So that's pretty amazing. Ray Davies from the Kinks, British musician. Kip Winger, another bass guitar player from the group Winger from the 80s and 90s. Brandon Flowers is he's a lead singer that's big with the millennials. He's with the Killers, which is a modern day group for the 2000s. He's lead singer, very, very effeminate face, very creative, and very good lyrics, good messages. Paul Morphy, I think it's Morphy. I looked him up. He's one of the best chess players in history, and had won the most tournaments in a certain decade or something. So pretty amazing for Gemini-Cancer Cusp. Todd Rundgren, and he's been in many groups. An amazing songwriter. Has a song called "Hello, It's Me." Bang the drum all day. Very, very thoughtful. Very, very. And I hear a lot of Cancer emotion in his music too. Graham Greene is I believe, Indian or Native American actor. I think he was in Dances with Wolves, big in the 80s and 90s. He has an amazing presence. Very thoughtful, very emotional. Cool though. Cool but emotional. He's good. Cyndi Lauper, she needs no introduction, and she's coming back on tour. I think she's going on tour this year. And that's another Gemini Cancer person who kind of, I think the critics wrote her off when she was young. She's still here. So there's that tenacious part of Cancer. Derek Forbes from the group Simple Minds. That's a Scottish group. Another bass player. So what is it about Gemini Cancer energy and being able to master the bass guitar? So not only good for music, but specifically bass guitar. That's really interesting to me. I can't imagine how many different guitarists are born on this cusp. Green Gartside, another musician, and John Ryder, another, I believe, British musician, but also bass. Anthony Jackson, an award-winning jazz and R&B bass guitarist. Randy Jackson from the show American Idol. He played with Journey, another bass guitarist and media personality, which is kind of the Gemini part. Randy Jackson. Mike de Albuquerque from, he's a new wave alternative from the 70s and 80s, another bass guitarist. I mean, I'm not making this up. It's amazing. Peter Weller, who's the actor from RoboCop, and he's amazing. He is, there's something clever about people on this cusp where I feel like this is a cusp where if someone isn't stable, this is a cusp where someone on this cusp could easily manipulate others, maybe in a sort of kind of a narcissistic way. And I can see that in the actors and actresses born on this cusp, that obviously they may be nothing like their characters in real life. But if they were unstable and dishonest, they could use the charm and the persuasion of Cancer to manipulate people probably very easily. And Peter Weller is one of those actors where he's kind of villainous almost, and he has this chin where he's kind of smug, but he's a really, really good actor. And then we have John Ilsley, another bass guitarist. Andy McCluskey from the group Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. They did a lot of soundtrack work. Another British group, another bass guitarist. And my favorite on this list, my absolute favorite, one of my favorite musicians of all time is Kurt Smith from the group Tears for Fears from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and today. They're still touring. And Kurt is amazing. He's born on June 24th. So he's a Cancer with a little bit of Gemini influence. Very, very wonderful emotional songwriting in the one half of Tears for Fears. Everybody Wants to Rule the World, Head Over Heels. And Kurt did half of the singing, and he did all the bass work, all the bass guitar playing, which people don't talk about. People talk about the main guy is Roland Orzabal. He was like the face of the group. And Kurt doesn't get talked about enough about how the emotion and thoughtfulness that he put into the music Fears. That music is so beautiful and enchanting and poignant. You know, even if you listen to it today, that music from 85, Songs from the Big Chair, just unbelievable. I know it's on the radio all the time, but just beautiful, beautiful. So Kurt Smith, awesome. And he's really, really into his family. Like, he posts online. He seems to be a very engaged father, which is more reminiscent of the early Cancer with Gemini traits rather than a late Gemini with Cancer traits, if that makes any sense. But yeah, he's my absolute favorite. So again, a shout out to my daughter. Let's do it over here. Shout out to my daughter with her new art, Castor and Pollux here with the star. That's a Gemini. I'm just leaving that up. Next week we won't be talking about Gemini. Tonight will be the last night, and we'll have some new art. But another shout out to my daughter. She got so frustrated. So I want to talk a little again about the myth of Gemini. So I mentioned briefly last week that this past week, the late Gemini period coming into almost early Cancer, is the various constellation or various stars within the constellation create interesting, vibrant mercurial energy, but that could also be edgy, impatient, and that's indicative of some celebrities that are born this week. And the myth of the twins is so interesting because you have it's usually two males, but it can be two males or females. It doesn't really matter, whatever, or androgynous, and two people that had the same mother, Leda, the same mother, but different fathers that were gods. So one father was Zeus, and the other father was a king named Tiresias. So two twins, siblings that look almost exactly alike, same mom, different fathers. So obviously they would have different personality traits because they have different fathers, different gods, different god energy coming into these two people. And their sibling, they're very caring about each other in a sibling way. So that's a unique way, I think, that Geminis care. Geminis are very fraternal, and like a fraternity or a sorority. I see Gemini. The sign of Gemini more than any other sign caring in that sort of way with people in a brotherly or sisterly or a side by side equal. We're equals kind of manner, and a companion. And someone mentioned to me earlier, which was very insightful, that Geminis, the spirituality of Gemini, going beyond the physical and getting into a higher level of Gemini and metaphysics, is Geminis need a companion, and not just a physical companion to go out and go to a club or dance and be crazy, but a soul companion, because the higher Gemini is a metaphysical person. And I talked about earlier that Gemini resiliency to bounce back from hurt, illness. It's amazing the resiliency that Gemini planets can have. And that's a wonderful thing. So that resilience can turn into more appreciation of the moment, more appreciation of what's in front of you, instead of always looking to other more exotic fields to see what's over in that garden. Ooh, what's risky and exotic over there. So coming into the Cancer, but that resiliency can create a more metaphysical or spiritual outlook, which happens with a lot of people, obviously, in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And my conversation earlier tonight was like, we never stop learning and never stop progressing, hopefully, right? And that's really true with the Gemini planets too. So even if Gemini is superficial at times, the Gemini planet or person can also move ahead. Carolyn says, this is a truly fascinating cusp and you have done it justice. Thank you. Oh, I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. That's funny you say that, because honestly, I have to say, when I was researching this cusp, I didn't feel like I had a strong grasp on it like I do other cusps. And I mentioned this other woman, but I haven't met that many people on this cusp. And when I was looking up celebrities, it was mostly musicians. So I was thinking, how does this air and water come together? So I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. But yeah, that Gemini energy moving forward and moving upward is more spiritual and more metaphysical. And the opposite of Sagittarius, the higher Sagittarius energy, is that philosopher and that teacher. So the Gemini-Sag axis is similar yet different, but both, two sides of the same coin, as far as ultimately being, a higher learning, higher education sort of cusp and period. That's very important. And Cancer's mental in the sense that Cancer likes to know about history. Cancer could be a good history professor or good science. Obviously, Cancer people are wonderful with animals. So someone on this cusp could have a natural rapport with animals. And to get back to the myth, the twins, they were involved very much with horses. So every myth I read, every article I read, and I have a couple books that say that, the myth of Gemini is like they were connected to horses in a very intimate way. So if they couldn't be intimate with people, they were able to communicate and be horse whisperers. The horses really picked up on and loved their energy. So I'm sure there were other, children of gods and goddesses that connected with animals, but something with the twins was very special. And then one of them, I mentioned it last week, I can't remember, one of them was also into boxing. So it's more of the physical, abrasive part of Gemini, which leads me to the last point tonight. Who's born today, but none other than Donald Trump. Whoa. Now, I know just saying that name can trigger all sorts of things in people, good, bad, ugly, whatever. And I'm not going to give you my opinions on him, but just from a purely astrological point of view, I have his chart pulled up. I'm going to talk about his chart briefly here. Sorry, I can't show it to you. But so Donald Trump was born June 14th, 46, 10:54 a.m. at the borough of Queens, New York. So he is a 22-degree Gemini, almost 23. So definitely a Gemini 3. So that means around 7 years of age, his chart progressed and he started to progress into the next sign, which would be Cancer. And then from there, in the heart of his business dealings and political time in his 30s and 40s, would have gone into Leo. So that is very specific, because that Gemini, at some point in his life, in his prime of wanting attention and making deals and getting attention any which way but loose, positive, negative, and everything, his chart was having progressed Leo energy. And I know not all astrologers use that or agree with that, but that's something to think about. Now, his natal chart, he was a full moon baby. So full moon, explosive. Full moon people are explosive. You generally have the sun and moon in opposite signs, because that's the period of time. So think about, he was born in this period, in this moon phase, right coming up on the full moon, right before the New York summer solstice that summer in 1946. So imagine being born that week, especially in New York City, the energy of New York City and the aggressiveness, and no one sleeps in city. So think about that breeding, how that helped to breed the Gemini and the Sag, full moon personality, very aggressive, pure yang energy, yang signs, air, fire. But what's interesting is he has the Mercury in Cancer, which is so different than a Mercury in Gemini. Mercury in Cancer is not flighty. Mercury in Cancer is a master at business. Cancer is incredibly, incredibly shrewd, sensitive, but hides it well, and very, very shrewd. So no matter what you think of him, he's an incredibly gifted, and probably, I would bet his IQ is probably off the chart, even though he seems so dumb sometimes, and he seems kind of stupid almost. But I'll bet either that's an act or that's just part of him, because there's parts of him that haven't matured and haven't progressed and haven't spiritualized. That's my guess. It's involvement. But as far as pure raw mentality, I'll bet his IQ is way up there. I don't know about his emotional intelligence, but the Mercury in Cancer, absolutely. His Venus is also in Cancer. So we're talking about a yang aggressive guy here with major water, major Cancer. So behind the scenes, very thoughtful, ruminating, and he never lets go of what is important to him. If something's important to him and he feels it, he will never, ever, ever let it go. That's why he is where he is. And that's why he's so prominent. So, he for a Gemini, think about that kind of tenacity to be the person he is and maybe not care what people think. Or so that's kind of interesting. Mars in Leo fits. It's a very late degree, so it's a cusp. It's a cusp period. But the Mars in Leo for the attention and being commanding and doing things in a big, 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 big way. And Mars and fire people get a lot of hits and misses in life because they do things in a big way. And then the rest of the planets, there's a whole bunch of air there. And then he has the ascendant, which is his rising sign in Leo, which fits as well. So you have the Mars and the ascendant in Leo. So, I mean, strongly, strongly fire as well. And his aspects, which maybe we'll do this in another night. There's a lot to talk about. His aspects are so, just intense. And when you look at most prominent people, especially in the political sphere, you don't see these kind of passive, shy charts without a lot of configurations and a lot of push and energy. Like, how could you, right? Because you wouldn't want to propel yourself and have that kind of stress, I don't imagine, if you had a different kind of chart. But he has, someone mentioned to me, a man like that must have a lot of afflictions in his chart because he makes a lot of enemies. He's incredibly combative. He's always making deals. One moment someone's dealing on his side, the next moment someone's off his side. And him too, being a Gemini, he's very dual. But he has a multiple planet opposition with the moon, the node, and Uranus and the sun. The node in Gemini, Uranus in Gemini, the sun in Gemini. Incredibly explosive and innovative. And again, the intelligence. Now, I'm not saying I agree with him, but astrologically, I don't think there's any astrologer that wouldn't say that this kind of chart is intelligence bordering on brilliant. It's there. It's how he uses it is a whole different story. But Sun conjunct Uranus in Gemini, unbelievable. The North Node in Gemini, he came into this life to learn how to be more Gemini and to be more rational, and who knows if he's succeeding. And then that moon in Sag is involved in opposing all those planets, so that Gemini Sag. And there's a lot more to talk about. So yeah, his chart, moon chart, just absolutely an explosive. Explosive chart with that hidden Cancer. So even though he's not technically a Gemini-Cancer Cusp person, he has planets in Gemini and Cancer, which totally offset his Gemini sun. So that's really like the beauty of astrology, because you have to look at those little hidden indicators to give. And don't forget, a Leo ascendant person like him, or a lot of other celebrities, Leo ascendant people are naturally great actors and actresses. They can put on a show for you. They can act, and whether they have formal training in acting or not, it's there. So if they act like they're a good person and they're not, they can fool you into that. Or maybe they are secretly a good person, but they're acting like a bad person because they want attention and they want to be infamous. So, Leo rising, there's no way a Leo rising is not going to get attention. One of my sister-in-laws has Leo rising, and she's very, very into her accomplishments and achievements in a quiet way. She's not showy about it, but she's always achieving. So, with all that yang energy and the Leo ascendant, there's no way he could ever say in his life, don't look at me. Don't look at me. So, but I'll leave all of you with that, with the Donald Trump. Maybe we'll talk more about that. And we'll go through that kind of thing, period. But thank you so much. I appreciate it. We're a little over the hour. Tell your friends and family. These live streams are every week. Right now, I've been doing them Fridays at 7. It's either Fridays or Saturdays at 7. Not sure about the summer schedule. I will have a little more flexibility probably in the summer, so maybe I'll try a afternoon or a lunch kind of thing, and we'll try some different things. But happy birthday to all the late Geminis, and then coming up on Cancer on the 20th, happy summer solstice, and then next week we'll be saying happy birthday to all Cancer Moonchild Crab people. Wonderful, wonderful time, summer. So happy, thank you so much. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And I really, really harping on that subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe. Oh, and I didn't mention, we didn't have time. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Being a father is wonderful, but it's incredibly challenging and can be very exhausting at times. And I have one quick theory. Maybe we'll talk more about this next week. Well, I have one quick theory on why a lot of people that go through therapy will mention that they didn't have a good father.